Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. We're going to revisit some of our previous episodes. We've had some great guests over the last several years. This week, we're going to be revisiting our conversation with Jeff DeGraff. Jeff is a business professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. He is seen as one of the top innovation thinkers in the world. He is an advisor to Fortune 500 companies, and he is also a best-selling author. He wrote a book entitled The Innovation Code, which we're going to be talking about some of the concepts there, and looking forward to today's conversation with Jeff. Give us just a little bit of your story, a little bit of your career history.
Well, I think the thing that I'd like everybody to first understand is I certainly did not plan to be an academic. I was a terrible high school student. Got to college because I was a good wrestler and got through college as a Teamster. And through a whole bunch of Alice in Wonderland maneuvers, somehow at 25, I emerged with a PhD and won a few awards. And had a job to come to the University of Michigan to work in the medical school on what would be an early artificial intelligence computer. Decided instead to go work for a guy with a $30 million pizza company, and 5 years and several $1 billion later, I sold Domino's Pizza to Mitt Romney and Bain Capital. And then I was on my way to running a car company, which will remain unnamed. And I got asked by two people, Kim Cameron and Bob Quinn. I think Kim was on your program. Wonderful, man. They're like my big brothers. He said, you want to come to Michigan and teach MBAs, how to be creative? And I remember Mark telling him, no, they're dull, drab, and awful. You know, you can hear them think. And they said, well, that's why we want you to do it. So that was 32 years ago. In the interim, I built these innovation labs around the country, wrote a lot of books. It's a long story, worked with Kim and Bob on a model. And at 30 some years later, I've been in half the Fortune 500 and 2 million miles on Delta Air, you know, the whole shebang. And it's all kind of ad hoc. I'd love to tell you I planned it out. Didn't. It just kind of happened.
Well, if you were able to go back and talk to a 22-year-old Jeff, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give him?
I'd say two things. I'd say, Jeff, one of the superpowers that you have that you probably don't know is energy. It just takes a lot of energy to build things and to keep moving because, you know, it never ends. I like to tell people, I have a big sign in my office here that says, organizations love innovation. And then it says ... but hate their innovators. And I think it's true. So one, I'd say, you know, you're going to take a lot of punches, but it's okay. And then the second thing is, I would tell the young Jeff, the thing that you think is your disability in the end will become your special ability. And I think people who are successful often have to overcome things. And I think we feel when it's happening like, you know, that it's unfair. But once you figure out that you have the cavalry ain't coming and you got to figure out how to save yourself, those skills become invaluable.
Yeah, great advice. You've written 9 books. Most recent is called The Creative Mindset, Mastering the 6 Skills That Empower Innovation. Now, most leaders and a lot of our listeners are new leaders. They might say, you know, I'm not creative. You know, everybody thinks creative is being an artist or having those abilities. But can you walk us through? You've got an interesting acronym that you use kind of as a foundation for that book. But talk about to these new leaders, kind of how they can be more innovative and how they can think different.
Yeah, I think, first of all, there's no one way to be creative. You know, there are people who are wildly creative, but take a lot of risks. We sometimes call them artists or, you know, the create version. There are people who are more incremental, but methodical. We call them engineers, right? There are people who are very aggressive and very fast. They're kind of sprinters. We call those people athletes. And some people who are, more community builders and do things that are a little longer but more sustainable. We call them sages, but they all have a different toolkit. So you got to think of it like a hammer, a wrench, a saw, and a screwdriver. And it's not a Myers-Briggs test. I'm not a big believer that it's about you. It's more like, is it a bear market or a bull market? And, or passing down or running down. What's appropriate? So in this book, which is, the latest book in the Creative Mindset book, I just tried to create a very simple acronym that would kind of cover all of these, right? So the first one, C, in the word create, stands to clarify, which is by far the biggest challenge. What's the real problem here? And that requires sort of not only getting to the root cause of something, but getting the scope right, paying attention to what gives you energy, what you really want to work on. I mean, there's a lot of projects that people are working on right now that they shouldn't be working on or are poorly structured. The second letter, R, is something that even Chaldean crows can do, which is copy, replicates what it stands for. And that's when you go on field trips or when you look at something complicated like the wonderful dome when you walk into Epcot at Disney, which is, of course, Bucky Fuller's geodesic dome, which is based on a spore. This is called biomimicry, right? You can copy things. The E stands for elaborate, which is what we would call brainstorming, but we've got so much of brainstorming all wrong, and I could talk about what sort of the science tells us about your brain doing that. A stands for associate, which I think is one of the amazing things your brain can do. This is sometimes called analogical reasoning, right? Or adaptive reasoning, which means metaphors. Your brain can bundle things and then go in reverse and all kinds of stuff that most people, I think, don't realize. The T stands for translate, which if you've ever heard a small child try and tell a story, that there's a narrative element. It's actually very complicated, or telling a good joke, they get the punchline wrong, right? So how do you build up? So you see what I'm doing here, Mark, is I'm building to up. And then the E stands for evaluate. How do you recognize a good idea? So create, right? Clarify, replicate, elaborate, associate, translate, and evaluate.
So as you're going into a meeting and you're leading a team through a process, maybe it's a new product, a new way of doing things, process. What are some tips that you give to leaders as far as on how to lead more innovative, creative type meetings? And a lot of these are done on video these days.
Oh, yeah. Well, three things. The first happens before the meeting, and that is what you really want to do is to greatly diversify the way in which the types of people you have in the room. And I don't mean like marketing versus manufacturing. I mean, you got some big idea people who spitball, you got some people who are builders who are more incremental engineering, because what you're trying to do in the room is to create constructive conflict. Now, this is going to seem very counterintuitive. The death of innovation is apathy or over-alignment. If you look at the handful of places around the world that produce most of the intellectual property, what you're going to find is it's not just that, there's a big university or something there. There's big universities everywhere. What you're going to find is that the people in the room have very different ideas, and they're not critical of each other. This is a very important distinction. We have great respect for each other, not prejudicial. We don't talk down to people. We treat people with great respect, but we challenge ideas, and that becomes critical. And that's going to create generative energy. So now the room's got energy, right? It's going to do that. I think the second thing, you want people to really look for anomalies and incongruities in places where people normally don't look. The problem with most of these meetings, most of these brainstorming meetings, is that they're either too kooky and nothing relates, or they're sort of, they're project management, incremental, little iterations of things, which really isn't very helpful. And the third is more important than ideas are questions, right? And asking questions brings you to new territories. The great late polymath James March used to talk about, elegant ideas or the beauty of an idea. And why that's important, I think what he meant by that is if you simply stick to iterations of the way you're currently thinking about something, what we call dominant logic or a dominant worldview, you're not going to get very far. But if you start looking at things that don't quite go together, but you're starting to see higher patterns, then all of a sudden I think you're on to something, really something. And I guess the final part to all of this is just allowing people the room to explore.
So somebody coming into, we actually talked about this with a previous guest in the last couple of weeks, the whole danger of somebody that's leading, speaking first. And, once their ideas are put on the table, it's hard for somebody to disagree with the leader's thoughts. Give some other practical tips if you're leading a meeting, just to get people's input, and what are some things that you've found in these innovative sessions?
I'll talk about it at a higher level, but there's an easier way to do it in teams. But let me just tell you how I would start a jumpstart. So inevitably, when a company comes in and goes to one of my Innovatrium labs, right? But we've got a diverse group. I invite, and I don't tell everybody I'm inviting these, I invite some people who are going to disrupt the institutional way of thinking. Mm-hmm. So for example, I had a high-tech company. It was very clear what it was doing. It was very absolutely sure about its shared vision. This is a senior retreat, but it could be done at any level. So I invited somebody from Goldman Sachs to come in and talk about from a sector investor standpoint. And this Goldman Sachs guy shredded the company and said, there's two other companies. I think they're better bets than you are. Here's, when we invest, we don't look at your company, we invest it. So first thing is I'm trying to do is discombobulate people. Then I invite an industry expert in, same thing. Then I invite a technology expert in the field, same thing. And then I invite the CEO. And I say, now it's your turn to talk, right? And what that does by staging it that way is it widens the playing field in two ways. Number one, what's critical about innovation is there is no such thing as innovation without momentum. And you have to create a sense of urgency that this is important to do. And the second thing is it also opens up the what's called the magnitude and momentum, how much and how fast. Magnitude, momentum, how much and how fast do we have to move here to do this? Because if you don't set the table that way, everybody walks. And people look for the easiest road out. So let's now move it back from CEOs to whatever. It could be a person from another department. Sure. It could be a person who has a different point of view about it. You could have a more radical person in your midst. Put those people on first, because what it does is it makes the person who thinks that everybody's got a shared vision, it makes them realize that they don't. And you'll tell whether people are real or not, because one, they'll either rationalize or try and be funny, which means that they have no real response, which will tell you that. Or in earnest, what they'll begin to realize is that you really don't have a shared vision. And that becomes one of the biggest issues. Most people who say they have a shared vision actually have a group of people who have either capitulated or have chosen passive aggressive behavior. They really aren't on the same train.
So going back to your days at Domino's earlier in your career, as far as thinking about leadership, and what do you wish you would have known before you led your first team?
Oh, geez, everything. I have to say, it's very funny these days being on these leadership podcasts all the time. I think I was a terrible leader, really bad. You have to imagine I'm a blue collar kid. Most of these people at Domino's built something very imaginative, which I was part of, which is you couldn't buy a franchise. You had to be a franchisee in training, what we called our MIT program, right? And so these were blue collar kids who were kind of from the neighborhoods that I came from. But I had a lot of degrees, and I was, I'd been pretty accomplished. So I wasn't exactly patient. Can I put it that way? And I don't think I was much different than the people that I worked with. But I remember going into my boss one day. One, I had far too many direct reports, and I had my fingers in too many things, and I didn't I didn't really trust people enough. I remember going in one day, I had 12 direct reports. I was one of the senior execs, and I remember going in saying, I want to fire everybody. I'm going to fire everyone. They're not smart enough. They don't work hard enough. All the things that got me to that role. And thank goodness for Tom Monahan, who kind of talked me off the ledge on a lot of this stuff. And so what happened was I started looking at people more like you would in an NFL combine, that I had hired these people because they had special skills, but I was asking them to do a lot of things that maybe weren't to their strengths. And once I started being really clear on what people's strengths were and giving them projects on that, then I became a much better leader because these people turned out to be quite extraordinary.
So you've written a number of books. What are on the top of your list of other authors or books that you recommend to leaders or to people that are interested in innovation?
This is going to sound very funny. I like kind of two genres of books. I read a lot. I'm a big reader. I like the old classic Think and Grow Rich. I still think Napoleon Hill had it right. I know he wrote it in the 30s, and his little his time with FDR and all that, but I still think it's just a gem. It's filled with wisdom, and it's one of the things Tom Monahan had me read when I started. I think the other books I really like are books that provide perspective. I think business people should stop reading business books, with the exception of mine. so mea culpa, my hypocrisy, my terrible hypocrisy. I love books that create perspective. So one of my favorites is the trilogy written by the late, National Archivist Daniel Boorstin, the great University of Chicago professor. And he wrote this book. It's very daunting. It's over 1,000 pages, called The Discoverers. But what I love about the book is Boorstin starts out with basic things like our concept of time and our concept of space and our concept of, how things work. And he gives us the whole sort of history of science in a very doable way. And I think it's just brilliant because it really suggests how much more of a ceiling there is. One of the other books that I highly recommend, really to end some of the political infighting, which is just nonsensical. Things are moving to the extreme. And, what is the old saying, Bertrand Russell? The whole problem with the world is fools and fanatics are so certain of themselves and wiser people so full of doubts. I think we need to go back to being full of doubts. It was a wonderful book. Again, a difficult read called Mass Flourishing, written by Edmund Phelps, the Nobel Prize winner in 2006. And what I love about the book, he basically takes on, this is a Nobel Prize winner, takes on all the major theories of economics and explains what their weaknesses are. They're like anything other tool. There's things that things do well and the things that things do poorly. And, what I love about people like this, the original thinkers, is, everybody's mad at them, because what he's doing is with great elegance and with a brilliant mind. He's basically taking your ridiculous two-dimensional argument with all your ridiculous friends on social media who are giving you likes. Those people aren't terribly helpful. They're not moving you along. They're not giving you a better perspective. And Phelps basically takes it apart and says, look, if you're going to do this, the world is filled with gray areas. You have to build your own ideas. You have to understand what you think in reality. And most importantly, you have to make things better and new. That's what this economy is all about.
What do you do outside of work to recharge?
Well, I go work out every night. I'm a former athlete. I have to say, at my advanced age, not everything is the way it was when I was in my prime. But I'm doing my best to hang in there. Love to go to the theater. Love to go to the symphony. Love to go to Michigan football games. I've been a fan forever. Hockey games. I sit courtside at basketball games.
Sure.
So I'm really. Three things, I think, my faith is important to me. I'm a practicing Roman Catholic, right? And the old Jesuits, right? I like to go to sports. I live in a little town that's pretty good at, just about every sport. And I'm very big on the arts. I think if you're going to be a creative person, you should do that. And I do, in addition to writing, I've written, I don't know how many, probably 1,000 articles at this point in my career, but I also like writing. So that's what I do.
So any parting advice that you would give to a new leader?
Yeah, I would say the big thing is leave room for the stuff you don't know now. As you move forward, if you actually create all the things that you're planning to do right now successfully, you haven't really innovated anything. You didn't learn anything along the way. So my big thing is keep moving forward, but leave room for the stuff you don't know now. And as you gather those things, understand that the real joy in creating is the journey of doing it, not the outcomes that you get.
Great advice. It's been a lot of fun, and I encourage everybody to pick up your 9 books. And definitely, I know it's made an impact on those that have listened today, and encourage them to get out and innovate and be creative. And wish you continued success.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.